going back to like your partner, it's so important to talk about what your money goals are, and it's really important to make sure the money is not taboo and that you discuss everything. And if one of you has more than the other, I would suggest, and this is what I'm hoping that my kids will do, because at this point, I've been investing for them, I would want them to have a prenup.
Hello everyone, today I'm speaking with Maya Corbic, a founder on Instagram, which has garnered over 129,000 followers by helping others teach the young people in their lives how to become millionaires. She's been featured in Bloomberg and Yahoo Finance. During our conversation, we discuss how her background of growing up in war-torn Bosnia shaped her personal journey of building wealth from almost nothing, what the key financial habits young investors need to develop to secure their financial future, and how newer investors can identify the investments that align with their individual financial goals and risk tolerance. We also examine the importance of choosing the right life partner and why getting that controversial prenup might be a good idea. Maya, you have such an interesting background. My mom's also an immigrant from Guatemala, and I know like that played a big role in what you do now with financial literacy and just providing education. Given your background as a first generation immigrant, and I know you have some like impoverished background as well, and that's just it's very relatable to a lot of people who maybe don't come from affluent means, but you've managed to kind of overcome that. So can you just with that like with that caveat there or that prior knowledge, can you maybe explain how you got to where you are in terms of providing financial literacy and education?
Yeah, sure. So, just a little bit about me. I am first generation immigrant from war torn Bosnia. I immigrated when I was 15 with my parents and my brother, and we lost everything in the war. So we immigrated with two suitcases and $50, and I lived in government shelters and government housing. And I had two part-time jobs when I was in high school, just to buy school supplies, bus tickets, and so on. And those hardships, I feel like they prepared me for where I am in life now. They actually, at the time, of course, things were hard, but I feel like those things made me stronger, so they pushed me to work harder. And I ended up going to university. I did the traditional route, go get good grades, get into a good university, get into with a good employer. I ended up getting my CPA designation, and being a CPA, I actually had some clients that had six-figure salaries, yet they were still struggling with money. They had sleepless nights, and it was very difficult for them to make their ends meet. And I just couldn't understand that, coming from very poor background. So I actually realized that the problem stemmed from them never being educated about money. And that's kind of when I decided that, okay, we need to do something about this. And also at the same time, I was 32. And at that time, my husband and I ended up paying off our mortgage. And we also paid off $60,000 in debt that we had on student loans and car loans and whatnot. So we were debt free. And I was actually able to quit my 9 to 5 job, and actually pursue something different, which is kind of what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. One thing that came to mind while you were providing your background, of course, that's a very like unique background. It sounds like you faced a lot of adversity. One, I've read a lot of books about like famous people or just successful people, wealthy people, and oftentimes a recurring theme is that they went through significant adversity in their childhood. And I'm wondering because I imagine you're providing a great lifestyle for your kids and for that next generation that obviously you want to avoid having like them having to kind of go through the hardship that you went through. How important do you think adversity is, or just that challenge throughout as you grow up, to contribute to that? I guess like aspiration to accomplish success, so not just success, but like wealth and something worthwhile.
I think it definitely contributes significantly. My children are very lucky; they're very privileged. And I try not to make them feel guilty about it. They couldn't control which family they're going to be born into. But I try to remind them of that very frequently. We travel, and when we travel, sometimes we go to developing countries, and I point out, this is how some people live, and look how you live. But I I just don't think that people who don't go through those experiences, I think it's very hard to come up with, I guess, that, what is it that I'm trying to look for the word, like that grit, that, that drive.
And the
My,
hunger. Yeah.
yeah, the hunger. That's exactly the word, the hunger. Because I look at my kids and they're really good kids. They, do well in school, and they're teenagers, but they're good teenagers. And they're, sometimes I look at them and I say, I'm like, well, guys, I'm like, you're not like, yeah, you're not hungry enough, like you don't want it badly enough. And there's not much I can do about that. It's almost like I feel like they have to go through some hardships. They have to have some doors slammed in their faces and not be able to achieve something or get something that they want, which will either, light that fire under them and make them, work harder and reach for those goals, or they may choose the alternative, which I hope they don't, and say, like, okay, I just give up. But I'm trying to teach them not to be people who give up. I'm trying to teach them that, you know, failures are, or every time we fail, it's good for us. We just learn from it, right? As long as we learn from it, it's good for us. So, but yeah, I find that for their generation, it's easier. They have it easier, but it's harder because they just don't have the same drive like I did.
Yeah, I think it's because it comes from a place of, like, absolute need and desperation, and it's hard to create that artificially. And my mom, she's from yeah, she's from Guatemala, but we grew up low income, and so I think that's what contributed to, like, our drive. But I've wondered the same thing regarding my kids. If I give them certain means, like, of course, I wanna give them the life that I didn't have, that my mom didn't get to have, but I think there's that tension there between giving them the life and, like, not withholding things that you didn't have, and so you wanna share that, but also in a way kind of like yeah, I don't know. That I just yeah, that's why I like to ask people that are
It's
in your
it's actually really interesting because I just had a situation maybe a couple of weeks ago where um, I ended up going shopping with my daughter. And before that, actually 2 weeks prior to that, we ended up doing a little like shopping spree for her for fall
nice.
clothes and winter clothes. So she got some stuff. And then we ended up going to a mall, and it was for different reason, but she was like, oh, we have this event that we're going to. I was thinking maybe I can get a new dress. And so we went to this dress store, and the dress was $120. Of course I can afford it. But the thing is, should I purchase it for her? Should she maybe hustle a little, figure out how she can find money, or like maybe resell some things on Facebook Marketplace and like figure out where, like
Mhm.
come up with that money on her own? So I mean, in the end, I said no. I said, you know what, we just bought you stuff. I'm sure you have stuff in your closet. This is something that, maybe you can come up with the money on your own. But it's
Yeah.
it's really tough sometimes. It's tough when you're a parent that cannot provide for your kids, and it's definitely not as tough, but it's tough also being a parent that you can provide for your kids. You just have to figure out the limits, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think that's a really good starting point for today's conversation because I want to dive into what those financial habits, those key financial habits that you're sowing in terms of the seeds you're sowing in your own children, but maybe the ones that you also encourage other parents to sow. And I think foundationally, maybe we can agree just creating or finding some way to motivate them that they can kind of have an intrinsic motivation by their own, like independently of the means around them. Because I don't know, I think it was Kevin Hart was saying, like, he once said his accomplishments aren't his kids, and he wants his kids to have their own accomplishments and their own wealth and kind of be able to stand on their own 2 feet once they're adults. But yeah, so starting off, like, what are those other foundational key financial habits and principles that you encourage in your own kids and others?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's really important for me for my kids to be independent, that they stand on their own 2 feet, as you said. So, one of the habits that we have been teaching them since they were very, very little is to pay themselves first. And what that means is that every time money comes in into their hands or into their account, that they take a portion and they save it. We started implementing that with allowance, and way back in the day when they used to get allowance, we made them save 50% of that allowance. And eventually that money was invested. So that way that they were like paying themselves, meaning paying into their own future, paying for their own goals that they want to accomplish. And then the money that was left over, it was meant to pay everybody else by purchasing things and whatnot. And the reason why we did that was because I wanted to create a habit that when they become adults and they get, their paychecks, they cannot go out there and just blow a paycheck. I wanted them to get into the habit that it's normal to save a portion, and it doesn't have to be 50%. It can be whatever they want it to be. But as long as they're doing that, and that's the first thing they do. Okay. And then they spend the rest rather than spending the money and seeing what's left over. Usually nothing is left over, right? Because we have wants. But they say that 95% of what we do on autopilot, we do it out of habit. So I really, wanted this to become a habit that is on autopilot. The money comes in, we put aside a certain portion and we forget about it. Not really forget about it, but we invest it for our future goals. So that's definitely habit number one.
I like that discipline that comes with money. And I think that's so important. I've heard that saying, "Pay yourself first." It was in the book Profit First. I think it discusses that. It might be behind me. I'm not sure. But it's one of the books. Gino Wickman, I think he wrote it. But one thing we've struggled with is having a scarcity mindset when it comes to money, and I'm sure you can relate to that coming from the background you do, where so when we first started in the real estate business, everything we made, every dollar went back into the business, and I think there's something to say for that. But letting go of that and not having like the guilt of spending money when you could be reinvesting it, or yeah, I just think, especially with kids, you're saying, yeah, I agree, saving it is really important. But you also mentioned how you don't necessarily discourage them from spending some of that money on things they want, almost like a reward, providing some kind of gratification. Whether and I, delayed gratification is important, but I guess what I'm getting at is that struggle between the instant gratification, so you can continue to stay motivated and not have a guilt of spending money that you worked hard for, but also having that discipline to save it. How do you encourage young investors who are getting into it to sort of balance like living in the moment and spending money on coffee or like just things that they're allowed to want, but also working towards their long-term goals when it comes to investing and just financial security and abundance?
Yes, so it's really, I know exactly, I know you're describing it. I know exactly what you're talking about because I do struggle with it personally, especially because of the background that I come from, and it's very difficult actually. Um, for me, I come from that scarcity mindset, and I'm trying to change it into the abundance mindset. And I would say it was only maybe 3 4 years ago that I realized how much of a life changing, I guess, how much of a life changer our money mindset is, like the mindset that we think, about money. And I used to feel guilty about spending money, even if now, of course, I can afford it. I'm financially well off. But, every time we went on vacation, I felt guilty because we would do 2 or 3 vacations a year and to some exotic destinations. And then I would think, oh my goodness, like there are people that cannot afford to do that. Like, but, I would feel guilty. But I also realized that, by me feeling guilty, I was kind of making my kids feel guilty. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to install the abundance
Mm.
mindset. So my thing is like, I always encourage them, I tell them that money is there for us to enjoy, as long as we enjoy it responsibly. And I think that's why paying yourself first is an important habit, because we put aside a certain amount of money that needs to cover, let's say, our future goals. And then I would say we pay our bills. But then the money that's left over really should be there to help us, enjoy life and really make the best out of it. Because, I'm getting older, I'm 44. And, when you get to my age, a lot of people start either dying or they have certain diseases, and you actually realize that life is not very long, and so we really should be enjoying it. So it's more like, okay, let's set up the groundwork, the things that we must do with our money. So it's like pay my bills, pay off the credit card bill, um, put aside money for savings, and then the rest, oh my gosh, enjoy it as much as you can. Don't feel guilty buying that coffee if that coffee gives you joy. I think it's important to be mindful with our money. So it's not so much about what we're spending on, because it doesn't matter what we're spending on. Personal finance is called personal for a reason, because we're all very different. We're different individuals and we enjoy different things. So I even use that as an example, like with my kids. My son, he loves video games. I can't stand video games, but I love to get my nails done. So the money that's left over, I want to spend it on getting my nails done because that gives me joy. He wants to spend it on video games. So we shouldn't be judging each other whether we spend it on coffee or video games or whatnot. Spend it on whatever gives you joy, but just make sure that you're responsible with the other stuff before that.
Assuming like that's the first step, is having that foundational mindset and relationship with money so you can build off of that. And I want to get into some practical steps that a young investor can take, assuming they've got the real estate between their ears, uh, established and that's strong. What are some steps that the young investor can take to start building or creating that long-term investment plan in order to kind of build that life that they want in terms of wealth and financial abundance?
Yeah, so I mean, I know you talk about a lot about real estate investing. One of the ways that my husband and I got started was house hacking. When we bought our first home, and this was not because we knew what we were doing, we just sort of fell into it. It was more luck than anything. We bought our first home and it already had a tenant in the basement. So we just assumed that tenant, and that tenant helped us pay off our mortgage faster. And we realized that this was a really good way to acquire real estate, and I hope that one day my kids do the same, because the cost of real estate is really, really skyrocketed where we are, and in actually most parts of North America. But
Yeah.
also I think that if people want to diversify, investing in some I wouldn't just say stocks, but investing outside of real estate is also a good option. And especially for younger people, they have a benefit of time. And what I mean by that is that they have a long time horizon ahead of them. And with compound interest in this long time horizon, their investments can really grow to significant amounts of money, even if they don't invest a lot of money up front. So I usually explore a lot of these different examples as to how much money you can invest and how much it's going to grow. That money, how much it's going to grow into being like in 40 years or 30 years. And 40 and 30 years seems like a long time, but again, when you're 44, it just kind of flies by. So you can play around with a compound interest calculator, but even if you invest like 20, $30 per week, that can add up to significant amounts of money. And then that money can essentially, if it stays invested, it can pay you dividends. And it's a passive form of income. So you could be sleeping, you could be on the beach, you could be playing basketball, doing whatever. That money is earning you more money, which is the way, in my opinion, that's really ideal way to create income.
Yeah, I like how you sort of mentioned that real estate just isn't the only option, and I agree with that. I think diversification is important, not just within real estate, but outside of that in different asset classes. But it's evident that in order to make those decisions and kind of distinguish between the different asset classes and options you have, there's a level of education you need. And I imagine a lot of people, I mean, they struggle, and maybe that's a place where people get analysis paralysis, where they aren't sure where to go. I know we, for example, when we started, it was crippling to just know, like, okay, which path in real estate should we take, or what should we invest in? And yeah, I guess what guidance or advice do you have for people who are maybe struggling to identify which investment vehicle is the best suited for them in terms of their financial risk tolerance, or their like the access to capital they have? How do you kind of educate people on that?
Well, I think, like, it depends on how much, you're right, like how much capital they have. I think that investing in the stock market is a little bit more accessible. Not necessarily stock market, but I particularly love, absolutely love index funds and ETFs. And this is something that I wish I learned about earlier because they provide immediate diversification, they have low fees, and you can invest small amounts of money and start investing small amounts of money in those types of investments. So it's a little bit more affordable than saving up for that first down payment with real estate.
Hmm.
But I do think that there is no one fit all answer for people. Like they just really have to decide what resonates with them. And sometimes it's about trying different things. It's instead of being scared, you just have to kind of dive right into it. And maybe don't dive with crazy amounts of money, but start off with, small. And if that's working out, put in more money. But I think action is important rather than, I understand analysis paralysis. I get analysis paralysis all the time too. But the way I get out of it is just by taking some small action steps.
Yeah, you mentioned index funds and ETFs. I think those are honestly, I'm not super well versed in the stock market. Like you said, we're pretty specialized in real estate, but I understand and I think it's obviously a popular investment for a reason. So can you first off just kind of provide some context as to what those investment vehicles are, why you like them, and I know in the real estate industry, there's this notion that the stock market is volatile and it's not a real asset. It's not tangible. And yeah, I mean, so how do you kind of overcome that just in your own investments? And yeah, what gives you
Yeah.
faith in those investments?
Sure. So there's actually a lot to unpack in what you just said. So, real estate market is volatile. Um, and what I want to mention is that it keeps going up and down. And you hear it in the news. Sometimes you have positive news, sometimes you have bad news. But overall, if you actually were to just Google stock market chart for the last 50 or 100 years, what you will see is this line that is going up. It has upward trajectory, but it does go up and down, but it has the upward trajectory. So what that means is that for anybody who's a long-term investor, if you're investing for long term, like 10 years and longer, and most young people are, your uh, portfolio holdings will eventually recover depending on what you're holding. So, what happens is that a lot of times people invest in something, and they want to hold it for a day or two. That is very different kind of investing. So there are three different types of investing. There are day traders, there are people who are on their computer and they rarely hold a stock for longer than a day. And I actually used to have a friend who was a day trader, and he made $50,000 in one day, but he also lost $30,000 in one day, which was actually his own parents' money. So
Wow.
that's not the type of investing I'm talking about. I'm also not talking about short-term investing either, where you really have to do a lot of research and figure out what companies you're picking to invest in. And when you said, "Oh, it's not real assets you're investing in," I think a lot of people think of investing like that. They think of it as gambling, but you are actually investing in companies into the economy. So what you invest in, never invest into something that you don't understand. Don't put your money behind a company. Like a lot of people were talking about Nvidia. That Nvidia has been everywhere in the news, whatnot. I haven't invested in Nvidia directly, maybe indirectly through my ETFs and index funds, but not to Nvidia because I don't really understand their business model. And I'm a CPA and I can analyze financial statements and whatnot, but I just don't have time to analyze those. So that's why I'm not a big fan of investing for short term. I think short term investing is great if you have short term goals. My goals are long term, and same for my children. They have long term goals. So I prefer to teach more the long term investing approach, which is get rich slowly. It's not get rich quickly. It's not gambling. And if somebody tells you, "Oh, invest in I don't know whatever this and that stock," run away in the opposite direction because we all need to when it comes to investing, again, we're all individual people and we need to have personalized investment profiles, and those profiles depend on our individual goals or on our risk profiles as well. So, we should not be just all investing into the latest and the greatest, because it may not necessarily work well for your goals, for what you're trying to achieve. And in order to invest for short term, like, you really have to do tons of research. And one person that does that kind of research is Warren Buffett. I'm not Warren Buffett. I'm a busy mom. I have a business to run. I don't have time to sit by my computer and watch stocks all day. That's why I prefer index funds and ETFs.
Yeah, could you just briefly define those two?
The reason why I like, so ETFs and index funds are very similar. And what they do is essentially they follow an index. And what is an index? So an index um, basically gives you an idea. So I'll give you an example. There's an index called uh, S&P 500. S&P 500 index is represents 500 largest US companies, and it tracks their performance and it tracks how well they are doing in the market. Those are companies like Microsoft, Apple, Google, and so on. And so the index, when you invest into an index fund or an ETF, essentially, instead of investing into a single share of Google, a single share of Microsoft, a single share of Apple, you're buying only one share, but that one share contains 500 pieces or of the 500 largest companies in the US. So with that one share, you're automatically diversifying and investing into 500 largest, most successful US companies. So that's just one index. There are different indexes out there. And what happens is that when you do this index fund investing, the fees are very, very low. And a lot of this is self-directed investing because you are usually the one that's purchasing this. You don't have a financial advisor. By the way, nothing wrong with financial advisors. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great. You have to make sure you have the right one, but they charge really, really expensive fees. So with index funds and ETFs, you're paying very low management fees. And I remember when I decided to start investing on my own behalf, um, I calculated, there are a lot of these free calculators online. Based on my existing fees at the time, I was going to pay almost $300,000 in fees by the time I was 65. And I was like, I don't want to give $300,000 to my investment advisor who was only giving me 3 or 4% return on my investments. With index fund investing, and I'm using S&P 500 index as an example. That doesn't mean that people should be investing
Mhm.
in it, but I'm just using that as an example to explain how this works. But S&P 500 index, like if you actually Google how well it performed, and again, if you're asking for that diagram, it will show you that over the last like 50, 60 years, annually, it gave people back 10 to 11% on average, sometimes more, sometimes less. But if you're a long-term investor, you are, if history is any indication of how well the investments are going to do in the future,
Mhm.
chances are that you will net 10 to 11% on your investment, if you invest in index funds. Now, that's without the inflation. And let's say inflation is
Mhm.
3%. Now you're looking at 7 to 8%, which is really not bad return. And you're paying lower fees because you don't have an investment advisor. And you're very diversified. And now you can not only invest in like 500 largest US companies, but you can invest in like indexes that follow international companies.
Mhm.
So you can diversify that way as well. And one thing I want to mention with the 500 largest US companies, the S&P 500, what happens is that they have very um, strong criteria who can become part of these 500 largest US companies. So if a company doesn't meet those criteria, they are taken off that list and a new company replaces them. So what happens with your investment, this is automatically accounted for. The company that wasn't as strong anymore is automatically not part of your index fund anymore. It's replaced by a stronger company. So essentially, all this work is being done for you. You don't have to really manage as much your investment portfolio.
Hmm.
This is literally like a lazy way to invest that is almost, um, it's like the easy way to invest with like really decent returns and very low fees. And again, I wish I learned about this earlier, because I would have started doing this in my like teens or my 20s, but I learned about it much later.
One thing before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on because I think people in their early 20s that are starting to invest and work towards building that financial future they want are also in the stage of life where they are looking for a lifelong partner. And you mentioned that you were house hacking with your husband. So I imagine you guys like, didn't have the financial abundance that you or the financial like accomplishments that you have now. And I think that's so interesting because like that's where I am too. I'm at this point where all right, like I'm open to that, right? And so as a result, I know for a fact that finances is one of the top reasons that uh, marriages dissolve and families struggle. And so how important is that topic to bring up before you choose a life partner, and how important is the life partner in like actually planning for long-term financial abundance and well-being?
I'm so glad you're asking these questions. And if I can be the anti that, helps everybody here, um, being 44, it made me realize that choosing your life partner is probably the most important decision you're ever going to make in your life, not to stress you out. And sometimes there's an element of luck. Um, I look at me and my husband, and he won't mind saying this, but my husband was a party animal, and a lot of that debt that we paid off was party debt, and he knows, like, he's okay with me saying this. And he didn't really have a concrete life plan, whereas I had my ducks in a row. But I married for love, and things worked out. They really did, but that was luck. Looking back now, I would have been very, very critical, because my husband really didn't know what the heck he was doing. I mean, he's absolutely amazing right now. He has a business. He's very, very successful. And the part, like, we are partners. Everything we own is 50-50. I mean, not 50-50, but everything we own is joint. Like, it's, we have a joint bank account, and we work together towards accomplishing everything. And when we're on the same page, we are such a good team. There are sometimes times when I found us not to be on the same page, and where we thought we were on the same page, and it's almost like for a couple of years we were spinning in circles. And this is like when we decided to build our new home, which was, it was an additional, basically, like, we had to take additional debt. We didn't have any debt at that point, but I really wanted a new home for our kids. Like, I wanted it in this beautiful area. And so my husband said, yes, sure, let's do it. But then for 2 years we were like spinning in circles, nothing was getting done. And then it was like, okay, we're obviously not on the same page. Let's discuss this. What's going on? And he was just like, we have no debt. Why would we do this? Like, there's no point, right? So it was, we had these discussions. In the end, we ended up doing it, and it turned out to be a really good investment decision in a way, because I know a lot of times people say your primary residence is not an investment, but we live in a really, really nice area, and it's all mansions around us. And this home has skyrocketed in value just over the last few years that we've been here. So I think it was a good decision. But going back to like your partner, it's so important to talk about what your money goals are. And it's really important to make sure the money is not taboo, and that you discuss everything. And if one of you has more than the other, I would suggest, and this is what I'm hoping that my kids will do, because at this point, I've been investing for them, I would want them to have a prenup. And then anything from that point on is fair game. We build it together. But everything that I bring into the marriage, because if I already have real estate investments and whatnot, I think that prenup is important to protect you from, you never know what can happen. And your life partner, that's going to be your best friend, that's going to be your biggest cheerleader, that's your teammate. You need to be able to discuss together what you want out of life, what are your long-term goals, how are you going to accomplish them, and when you're on the same page, you can do anything. I'm very active on Instagram. I go by the handle teach.kids.money. I have a blue check mark. There are a lot of impersonators out there. I also have a new book that's coming out. So if you want to diversify and learn a little bit more about investing, this book is available on Amazon. It's called From Piggy Banks to Stocks, The Ultimate Guide for a Young Investor. It looks like a book for little kids, but it's purposefully done that way because I want to make investing simple. It's written in a language for a 10-year-old, and it is meant for adults and children. And it's kind of like, think of it as like a book from those dummy series that just explains basics of investing. So, yeah, that's where you can find me. And, I'm grateful to be on your show today. And thank you so much for having me.